Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's Device Management Interface Brigade call. Thanks for joining. As usual, the call is recorded and will be published on YouTube, so please be mindful of whatever you share with the community. First of all, we have a pretty good agenda today. First of all, I want Amit to give an update on what got merged lately, especially around the stop managing device, to make sure that everybody's on the same page here.
Yeah, so the only update that has happened over the last week is the introduction of the stop managing device, and we did speak about this in the previous call. So the API, as we discussed, would take in the name of the device, right? So basically, this would enable that this API can be called even before we receive the response from the start managing device. And yeah, and that's the only update that is there. And the response to this would carry a status and reason if it fails. Uh, so the only failure reason that I can think of in this case, or which could be acceptable, is that if you pass a wrong name, right? Because it wouldn't make sense that if you say that, okay, stop managing this device, and if the device adapter comes back or device manager comes back and says that, oh, I cannot stop, because that wouldn't be acceptable, right? That would be, a stop is always a binding thing, right? Because the higher level component is going to stop. It's like a delete, right? So you cannot say that I cannot delete it. So that's the idea. Yeah, that's the only change that has gone in.
Perfect. Thanks, Amit. Anybody has any comments, any questions? Okay, then if not, we can pass on to the next topic. Based on our discussion the past week, I've put together a document here that, no, not this one, sorry. I put the wrong link in there, right? Put together a document. It's called OLT logs. Pretty dumb name. I think I can come up with a better one, but fine, whatever. That describes some of the expectations that we discussed last week and some of the requirements that were put forth in terms of logging of the device manager, in terms of logging of the device as a whole, of the system of the device, and of the OpenOLT agent. So with this document, what I plan to do is, as soon as we settled on some thoughts, I would like to present to TST, because it includes, it's a more general discussion that just only the device manager side, because it also includes the OpenOLT agent. So per the requirements, the idea was that we need to grab the logs of the OLT operating system, for example, ONL. We need to grab the logs of the OpenOLT agent, or at large, any logs of any component that talks to Volta. We need to have configurable log levels on the box for the OS and for the agent itself, and that these logs need to be exported to an external logging system, for example, Outstack. So the idea for the system logs is that we have them in a syslog format, and then the device management configures the IP and the name of the remote rsyslog log server. This grabs every log from the different agent systems, and they get pushed to this external centralized server. And from there, they get grabbed by Outstack. They have this notion of objects that grab logs out of files and everything else, and they get imported into Outstack, and from there, they showcase in Kibana and everything. Other point is that if the device does not support the syslog, the device management component needs to import the logs in itself and export them to the same centralized server in a syslog format so that the elk stack doesn't change, but we export them with the same syslog format. But if the device supports syslog, the device management component does not even see the logs at all. It's just used for configuring the endpoint or where to push the logs.
If I understand what you're saying correctly, you're saying that the device management component is abstracting the log publication into syslog, so that if a device doesn't natively support syslog, it's the device management component responsibility to simulate that or emulate that.
Yes, that is the case if the device does not support syslog. Does that make sense?
Is there any reason we can't say, hey, look, you know, devices can log however they want. It's the deployment's job to get them into syslog. We don't care if they use, or we don't care if the syslog is native or if they go through a different mechanism to get into elk, right? Do we really, I guess the question is, that's really outside the responsibility. If a device management wants to allow for the setting of the syslog server, that's great. I guess that's okay. But other than that, I'd say, look, if you don't support syslog, it's up to you how you define to get things into elk. It can go through a syslog server. You could write a direct elk plugin yourself. We don't care.
That makes sense. Yeah, I mean, this simplifies our life, I guess.
Right.
Yeah, we could say just this. We could say it's the deployment responsibility to get the logs proper.
I mean, even with syslog, what we're really saying is, you know, there's existing ways to get syslog into elk. So use those. Device management, being able to set capabilities such as syslog server might want to be one of those optional values that you can set, which means it's not going to be valid for every device. So much like we have the, you know, IOCTL control for setting PMs, this is kind of like that. You know, it's you can set a value, and that value would be the server, but not every device that listens to device manager is going to support that. That makes sense? I mean, it really is saying this is outside our control. Just get the logs to elk.
Well, what I'm saying is we would rather make maybe a suggestion. So the syslog would be our preferred way of doing it.
Yeah, it's the best practice. Use syslog.
Yeah, maybe what we can do is we can split the fact that we can provide an API to configure a remote logging server endpoint and saying, however you do it, you configure it to this. We expect the system to get this IP and push the logs there. And from there, they should go to elk stack. How you do it, it's up to you. We suggest.
Sorry about this. Sorry about the noise, but what I'm suggesting is that if the device doesn't support syslog, then setting a remote log server doesn't mean anything for that device. So it needs to be one of these things that are optional. That, hey, you know, like IOCTL, right? You can set a value, but a response to that set could be, this means nothing to me, or I don't support it.
Okay. Then what would be the way for these devices to push the logs? Would be just do it however you want?
Yep. That's kind of where I'd be at it. It's like, look, even syslog, it's a best practice. I mean, it just makes sense. We're saying getting logs into elk isn't our responsibility. We're I mean, it's not even a requirement that a deployment uses elk if they don't want to. They could just use syslog. I mean,
Yeah,
even our
so
elk stack in Volta is a recommendation or a best example, best practice.
yeah, I would agree with David here. So I think we should just have the mechanism of specifying what is the destination for this log. So basically, yeah, the IP address or maybe the IP on the port or whatever, right? But without any emphasis or any talk about what the format of the logs could be or how the log should be sent, right? So for example, if we have a device which just logs it to the disk and say periodically uploads it I'm just thinking hypothetically, periodically uploads it to say a FTP server, right? So irrespective of what mechanism it is deploying, right? We just provide the IP address where the log should go to, right? And after that, how the device sends it to that endpoint, and from that endpoint, how it makes it to the ELK stack, I think that should be left to the deployments.
Our play very limited. But telling that the syslog is on no servers if you don't care about anything about the format there.
Sorry, there's a lot of noise. It's not clear. I don't know if it's only for me or if everyone's facing this.
No,
It was noisy for me as well.
Understand.
Yeah.
Data gets into the server. Why didn't you tell the OLT or any device that what the server is?
Yeah, I'm not able to catch that. Did someone catch that?
Well, I'll dial in from the phone.
No, it's impossible. I cannot distinguish any words. Sorry.
It sounds like shortwave radio or something.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Atmospheric condition interference.
So I agree with Amit that in some sort of way there needs to be an endpoint where to push. So that is the only real thing that we need to have.
Again, why do we need an endpoint to push? I mean, okay, if a device supports it, that's why I keep going back to IOCTL. It's optional values, right? You could say log endpoint, or might even call it from a device management API standpoint. I'm going to have a set method, and that set method as a first parameter takes the name of the value I'm going to set. You know, it could be a enum or a string or whatever, and then the value. And so you do a set syslog server or syslog endpoint. And if the device that you're managing supports syslog, it would interpret that and set the actual syslog server. If a device you're managing doesn't support syslog, then it might return an unsupported response to that. If the device supports upload log or FTP log files, then you might have a set FTP endpoint. So that each device that you're managing can optionally support the configuration it sets, like we're kind of doing with the PMs. I think it's PMs. But it might be that the device doesn't support any remote logging capability, and it's completely outside the scope of device management, how it happens.
Yeah, I think you put it very well, David. So I agree with this.
Makes sense.
I mean, do we have to specify at all what we're doing? I mean, couldn't it be in a way that we just pass some, I don't know, some blob which is only of meaning to the device manager? So the device manager who knows the device and knows what to do with the blob.
Well, that is effectively
Because
David is suggesting. It's just that we make
Yeah,
it
but
a little nicer by having an enumeration of what can be sent down to the device. I never like a system that is completely opaque to what is sent down.
yes, you're right. But in principle, I think we will also for other. I mean, there's a discussion of log levels, for example. I mean, you could have a device which has, I don't know, 10 log levels. Other devices have 2 log levels. So why just specify 3 log levels here? So why not leave it up to the device and leave the interface in a way that you can do whatever the device supports? And I mean, is there really a need that it's somehow abstracted from the type of device? Or, I mean, the one who is using the device manager to set up the logging, he knows what type of device he wants to set the logging up, right? So it's not that he's.
So
he don't.
I mean, the problem you're going to get to really quickly is if we have lots of different devices that are being managed, and the operator knows which device, the device management abstraction becomes pointless, right? You say, hey, talk to and manage the device the way you normally manage the device. So, I mean, right? I thought the whole point of the device abstraction or the device manager API was to create that abstraction.
yeah, I agree here. The worry I have in having this generic set is, and with strings in there, I'm very allergic to it because I've seen how much it creates issues in implementations having strings in there because everybody does his own thing. So I am very against having strings. I'm okay having enums that can be extended. I'm perfectly fine with that. I'm not okay having a random string because then you have to create specific drivers for each specific implementation just because of that string. So I'm fairly allergic to strings.
Yeah, I fully understand this, but I mean, we're talking about logging, we're talking about debugging, right? So, for example, we have boxes which allow you, so they have several processes running, and you can specify for each of these processes the log levels, several log levels, more than 3 log levels. And this is, while this sounds complicated, this is really, really helpful because you cannot enable debugging for everything because then it's simply too much. So for specific situations, you want to be able to just for just a specific number of processes, services, whatever, you want to enable debugging, but for others, you want to have infos and so on. So in order to be able to do that, you have to really specify everything in a very detailed manner. So you have actually to specify the superset of options. And this is really what we're going to do. If we are only specifying a subset of them, then I fear that it will not be that useful. And at some point in time, we will tell you, okay, then go directly to the device and configure the logging in a way that this is really helpful for us.
So, I mean, that is always an option here to say, look, well, there's 2 aspects. There's configuring the logging and then configuring the destination of the logging, such as the syslog server. Configuring the destination of the logger, again, syslog, is a common functionality for all devices that support syslog, right? That makes sense. It's perfectly reasonable to say, hey, in terms of configuration of logging, go to the device, because there is so much, as you indicate, so much diversity in how each device supports it and what each device supports. We can't come up with that common abstraction without essentially just saying we have a common way to get data from one point to another, but we can't have a common message format. And there really is very limited value, I think, in having a common envelope for this case if the data in that envelope is different, because, well, you know, you still have to have your, if it's this device type, do this, if it's this device type, do that everywhere.
Yeah, but playing the devil's advocate, David, isn't it fair to also say you're being plugged into the system, you're an OLT device, for example, you should adhere to some standards. I think what Holger was saying was right. I mean, they are going to say to these devices, do some only warning messages or high priority messages, or however they are going to configure those. Shouldn't there be a standard for Volta? I'm not talking about the device manager to enforce. Hey, if you're going to go and log anything, follow the standards. I mean, we after all, we are telling the device this is where you're going to put the logs anyways. Shouldn't we just go ahead and say, by the way, we recommend that you reformat the logs into this format? Or otherwise, I mean, we don't even have to tell the devices, here's the log location. I mean, why do they care? If they are going to go ahead and do whatever they are going to do, don't even tell them where they are. Or why is the device manager being involved in this case? There's another logging system infrastructure anyways with Volta. Let the device, whatever the software running on it, interact with the that log manager and do whatever it's going to do. This is just, I don't know, it feels somewhere in between. It wants to manage logs, but not entirely.
I tend to agree here that the whole point of this is an abstraction. So I get it that, for example, the Adtran OLT can do like 1,500 different types of logging for 1,500 different type of processes and packages and whatnot. But the whole point of the API is to abstract away from some of these details. And if this makes the fact that if you have 10 level of debug, they actually get combined into 3, I'm okay with that. Again, this might be an operator's choice. It is also something that here we configure for how can you say it's like a family of devices. So maybe we have a middle way approach where you have an API to set the log level with like a string of a package and a level itself, which is again a string, which is somewhat similar to what we do, for example, in Volta with the set debug, init cd and stuff like that. So maybe that's an option, but at least it's bounded to okay, we're setting the log level for this object, which you pass in as a string, at this level, which you pass in as a string. I wouldn't like, the whole point of this is having an abstraction, and going to directly to the device makes no sense. That is what I'm going at.
But isn't it that somehow what is done by Volta as well? I mean, you have the open flow abstraction at this, but then you added profiles later on because you need more control, because the open flow abstraction does not allow you to do fine-grained specifying of whatever it is needed. And so there were profiles added later on. Couldn't profiles be a solution here as well? So there are profiles, and you can switch profiles, so you can specify profiles for certain devices, and then these profiles are used. So there's a
That's not a bad idea, although I feel that we're getting complicated very quickly. I don't know, what other people think?
I mean, we could just have named profiles. I mean, that makes sense. I guess the question is, I'm not sure they'd be something stored in the KVs like they are for tech profiles. I mean, even if we have names high, medium, low, right, and then high, medium, low is somehow interpreted by each device differently. I mean, if we have tech profiles like we do for, or profiles like we do for tech profiles, then it becomes, hey, set profile, here's an ID. And then the device is, where's the device going to get that blob of data, I guess? Is it going to go to the KV store? I don't think we want to have that dependency. Then if not, then we're going to have to have the API be, or the person calling set profile really just say, I'm going to go query a blob of data from the KV store and pass it down, essentially a JSON description of what logging I want set.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm okay with that.
So maybe what I take away from this is that we're okay in having an endpoint API where we specify where to store the logs. We are okay in having a suggestion for this to be syslog, rsyslog, and elk stack. And but we are debating how much of the abstraction is actually required. And that is not a question I can answer. It's a question that, for example, Deutsche Telekom need to answer. Because if the operations team from DT comes and tells me, around this API, I only care about 3 levels of logging, or 4, trace, debug, of info, word, and error. That's 5. If you only care about these 5, which seems to be the standard, we put in these 5, and whatever you do in your device manager, OLT, or whatnot, needs to adhere to this. That's the whole point of an abstraction. So I guess that needs to be discussed with Manuel, with others from Telecom. I don't know. Amit, any thoughts? Do you know what the guys, Mahir, anything?
No, I wouldn't know what the thoughts there would be. But yeah, what I think as my personal view on this is that, see, when we are enabling this kind of logs, that means we really have some problem which we're trying to debug, right? Else, why would somebody be toggling these log levels? And if we are in such a problem, we can't debug an abstract system, right? We need to really know what the system is. So I would assume that the people who are debugging that would be aware of what the system is and the specifics about that. So wouldn't it be okay wherein this API can help the guys who are debugging the system to configure the system in such a way that they could toggle around with that? So basically what I'm trying to say is something similar to what David was saying, that you could query the systems asking it, okay, what are the components that you have where log levels are configurable, and what are the possible values? And then the operator or guy, whoever is getting this information, could say that, okay, this thing has got 10 components, out of them logging needs to be changed in say 4 of them, and the possible values for those, which again has been returned by the device, is this, and he could change it accordingly. Because we're assuming here that the guy who's doing it is very well aware of this specific type of device. Else, if he just looks at it as an abstract device, I really don't know how he would be able to debug it. Because say if you're debugging the edge core device, you need to know that there is something called as an OpenOLT agent, which runs, and there are log levels to be configured on that, versus whatever, a BAL management, dev management daemon, right? So you need to know the internals of the device, else you won't be able to debug. So I think the API should provide a mechanism to be able to configure those. But
although you could almost argue that if the operator really knows the type of device, the details of the device, any abstraction is really going to get in their way, right? If they know it's an edge core device, they're going to tell my or SSH to the edge core device and issue the commands right on the edge core, because that's going to be faster than going through any other interface to get there. Because they, as you said, know the device.
Well, yes and no, in the sense that maybe no, the device is a little strong. I do like the idea of a get of the capabilities of the device and a set of something based on those capabilities. That's actually, to me at least, a pretty doable solution that solves some of our discussions that we're having today. No?
If you do a full capabilities model, yes.
But do we have a set for more than one devices? I mean, a bulk set?
We could.
Then it may be problem to get and set then. If you want to set more than one device together, I mean, to a level of debug, then how can you get the information from these devices and set again? I mean, probably you want to set a common level to all of them.
Sorry, the API that we are talking about here, the device management interface, right? That is on a per device basis. So we always pass the device identifier on which we are trying to operate on.
Okay, that makes sense then.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Then maybe let's go forward. I'll reshape this and send it out. And maybe let's go to the OpenOLT logs. And then maybe what I can do is I can share it to the TST and have a discussion there next week. With most likely, I would say this proposal. For setting the logs, and this proposal for the endpoint, I guess, of the where the logs get stored, like something like that. That makes sense?
I didn't see the proposals. I'm not right at the screen. Are you seeing the capability model or just the basic set model?
I'm saying that for the log, the log level, there is a get of what components are there and what log levels can be set, and then you do a set of a component and a log level. For the location of the logs, there is a generic set, or like set location, set something that I can come up with, and there is an enumeration of objects. And the value is just interpreted by the system.
So it's not a full capability model then?
What do you mean?
A full capability model was what I think I mentioned earlier. I think it was mentioned last, which was I should be able to query the device and get its full list of capability, log value or log setting capabilities, which could be, hey, I can do, it would contain things such as can do packaging or can do package level logging. Here are my log levels. Here are the packages available. So it's a fully descriptive model. It's a lot of work, but it's a fully descriptive model. And if it's a fully descriptive capability model, then also part of that description would also be, hey, I can do remote logging. I need an endpoint, which means setting of the endpoint is really the same as setting any other capability.
Sure.
But as I said, it's a lot more work. Because essentially you're basically completely abstracting any possible logging system.
I mean, the elements in the northbound would need to know what they're working with, but I don't know.
I'm not sure we want to do that. I'm saying I was just clarifying that we're not doing that more than anything else. Because again, that's a significant amount of work. And to your point earlier, if the operators don't need it, then I wouldn't recommend doing it.
Yeah, so I think it might be good to take some advice from the operators, because you always, as we were talking about earlier, right, that the operator always has the option of directly going to the device and setting the log levels. And if this interface does not provide enough flexibilities, then the operator anyways would be compelled to do that. So is it worth the effort if we are trying to build a pretty complex system for setting log levels and configuring things, given that there might still be things for which the operator directly has to go to the device? So maybe we should take some advice from the operators.
Okay, I'll take an action item. And I think the same applies for the OpenOLT logs. Again, same thing. There's a couple of missing objects, like it's missing log level runtime configuration that needs to be implemented. So that's okay. We need to do that, but it's fine. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll reshuffle this and see a few options that we have. And try and gather some feedback from the operators and see what they can tell us and exactly what is the required set of abstraction that is needed to try and understand what we need to do. And maybe it's just we don't do it. And if you have to go and interact with the logging levels of the devices, you just go directly to the box. I'm fine with that. So, okay, good. Okay. Anything else before we switch gears? No? Okay. And if not, a small time to take a look at the Jira stories that we need to take care of. There are not that many. There are not that many, but there's a few of them. I have one for the documentation, which I've not really started on. Amit is working on the document to the name versus the UUID and everything that we have done. And the AAA will come at that later. Am I missing anything, Amit?
No, not to my knowledge. I think that's all.
Okay, sounds good. Perfect. One thing that we did since we discussed it last week, there was a patch on Gerrit that implemented the metrics that we are exporting as part of this API into the exporter, the Kafka exporter. So we have merged that patch, especially here. So it exports our metrics in a Prometheus readable format, and it reads them from our system here. Sorry. Here. This is the Prometheus registration of the different parameters that we want. So that's merged. As soon as we start publishing stuff, they can get read by NEM. So that's good. It's just an update on that work. Amit, did I forget anything that needed to be shared?
No, that's good.
Okay, perfect. So thanks a lot to Kesavan for doing the work here. Just it's a good patch to have done. So at least part of the testing is part of the whole system is done. Okay. Last thing I want to bring up for the day, and this might require some more time to be spent on it because it's a very big topic. Is that in Volta 2.5 there is a requirement from Deutsche Telekom and most likely from Turk Telekom too, Mahir, you can confirm, to have security authentication at least on a per object basis, meaning that the Vault CTL will need to have accounts and certificates. and we will need to secure gRPC channels from the OpenOLT adapter to the OpenOLT agent. And that touches us because also the device management component will need the capability of being secured on its northbound connection, but also handling devices in a secure way on the southbound. From an API perspective, we would then need the capability of toggling security on top of the implementation of the API of the device management interface, and have the capabilities of creating accounts and sessions for the device manager in order to support role-based access and things like that. Before I go further, any questions? No? Great. Okay, so the...
Wait. I have questions. Sorry, I was just getting there. Is there any reason we're not taking the standard cert approach like kubectl and that or maybe we are, just use a cert of, don't use our systems to build a user management system. Just give the guys a cert and let them use that cert to access the system, and that cert can be mapped to a user. But again, we're not controlling the creation and deletion of users. We're saying if you register a user and a cert with us, we'll verify that cert to that user, and then that user is essentially associated with the roles they can accomplish.
Actually, that's what we are talking about pretty much. There has to be a concept of user,
Yep.
and there has to be a concept of a session token with the, what do you call, each device that you're going to manage. Those users has to be registered with the device at the beginning when the installation happens, and the user has to be able to authenticate the fact that who the user is. Anybody with coming with the username and token shouldn't be going in. You have to do an authentication. This is really following very closely what the Redfish does in the OCP side.
Well, again, if we're talking an API, a gRPC-based API, there are best practices around gRPC, which is really all about certs, and something like the JSON web tokens, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's mechanisms there already. When I just see the create accounts, it worries me because I don't think it should be our responsibility, and it seems to be best practices around gRPC is it's not the responsibility of the implementer to manage user accounts, right? It
No.
somewhere.
This is not what you're talking about. This is not what you're talking about. And I do agree with you. The accounts are assumed to be, this is why I said at the time of the installation, accounts are what they call created on the device. So by using the security APIs that we're discussing here, there isn't any additional create account. These APIs are just saying for a given user, do the authentication, create a token, and use that token. So yes, we are not going to be managing APIs from this level, the user accounts from this level. You're just going to be logging in and obtaining a token. That's it. I agree with you.
Okay. For devices, are they going to be using something like TACACS for authentication? And if so, some admin is going to be creating the account there, I guess.
Yeah, the accounts are.
I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to understand what you mean by create accounts on device.
Somebody creates some method to create accounts on the device. We really don't care. All we know is there are accounts on the other side. We don't want to get into the business of managing account creations, account management. We're not going to do account management. I know what you're thinking. This is a big, huge can of worms.
It is. It is.
No. We don't want to get into that one. I agree with you.
So really, yes, what we need is the capability of, given our PC that we expose, to have somebody authenticate for that RPC, and if it's enough, for example, his role is enough to execute a reboot, we just allow it. If not, that is all. There is no knowledge of, oh, please create account with this and that capabilities.
I mean, you can have that capability, saying, okay, create account, etc. But we are not going to be doing it from this side. I mean, the device should somehow, as just like David said, device should support that functionality. But again, just like David said, we don't want to go ahead and manage that. If there's a functionality that says create an account, etc., they should be on the device side. And use TechX. Exactly. This is not an account management system. This is a system where here's a user account. I'm logging in, authenticate me first. Based on that one, you create a session token. I'm going to use the session token to reboot my device, change the configuration, etc. And when I'm done, if the token hasn't expired yet, I'm going to go ahead and delete the token. So start session, end session, and in between do stuff. Or maybe we can just go ahead and create a Jira, assign it to David to implement something like TechX.
No.
Yeah, I think this is it is just a matter of making sure that we use proper proper accounts for proper calls. The other side of the things is that also the northbound API needs to be secured. So we just use, again, tokens and certs for that, and we just
not necessarily. On that case, I'm going to disagree with you. There is going to be cases where device is going to send alerts, and I don't know if we need session authentication for that one, or having a constantly enabled token going forward. I mean, the alerts are going to be going to the system where we know it is already been told us that we are going to be sending the alerts to. Sorry. So if we have a HTTPS-based communication, which I think all the communications should be HTTPS, that kind of also implies the fact that we are going to use what they call certs. We know that we are authentic. We are talking to a device that we were told we are going to be talking to, and the device is HTTPS. The communication method is HTTPS. I don't think that we should be managing session tokens for that cases.
The problem is you need to know the user for auditability purposes, right? You need to know Joe or Mary made this change on the device. Or prevent Joe or Mary from doing so.
Yeah. Southbound definitely. Southbound definitely we need to have that session authentication. But northbound, not always. I mean, of course, like when the southbound interface is coming in and saying, okay, I'm going to reboot the device. You have to know the fact that this request is coming from a user that's authenticated to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's given. When you're communicating back, you should be communicating saying that, okay, I'm rebooting the machine. Yeah, that's still within that session. But for the read-only functionality, some of the read-only functionality anyways, if somebody says, if an authenticated user says, I'm going to set you up such that if an event happens, you need to notify this web server or talk to gRPC, which is again a web server, but anyways, talking back to the northbound interface and saying there's an alert, I don't know if we need to have session. I don't think we should have session.
Yeah, you probably you need to know that, as you said, it's a authenticated host that it's coming from, but that's that can be done with certs.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I don't think it needs to, as you said, log in, other than Yeah.
This is pretty much following what the Redfish OCP guidelines do. At the time of the installation, you have to go ahead and install a cert. You have to go ahead and create user accounts, and then let those, whoever is managing the system, let those entities to like enable, disable things, reboot the machines, update the files, update the image. Those have to be all session-based operations. But informational stuff, you authenticate with certs.
So to the point where somebody needs to be taken into account when an operation is done against the device manager for a specific device, wouldn't that mean that we need accounts in the device manager, or we just with cert and that's it?
No, the account manager doesn't really have to have any accounts. The device has to have accounts.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
The device manager has to be able to
pass it along,
communicate and pass the user cert, if you will, down when it communicates to the device, right? Or
right.
the user account information.
Right.
But it's not going to manage it. It's just a transport layer.
Exactly. I mean,
again, very, very similar to what kubectl does, right?
Exactly.
You configure the user certs on the in Kubernetes, and kubectl via the kubeconfig, you specify the user cert, but kubectl itself just passes it down.
Yeah. I mean, in that case, I mean, dude, I'm hearing you about the managing the account management in the device manager. It's pointless. Device manager on this case is only a go in between or man in the middle.
Yep.
It just takes the data from upstairs and sends it downstairs.
Okay.
If the user, and yes, there will be APIs that says from the management side, the dashboard, I want to create an account. The device manager just sends that information again down to the device saying that here's a request for you to create a new account. We are again still not managing accounts at all on the device manager side. Too much work and unnecessary too much work. Hello?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I was just taking notes. Sounds good to me.
Take a look at the documentation I sent you for the OCP.
Yes. Indeed.
I mean, it's very straightforward.
Yeah, I'll just clarify some of this in light of what has been discussed today, and maybe put a few more clarification points. I'll send it out again. And if we approve it, we then would have to write some of these APIs in the protobuf form. Again, just pass through. Like, for example, create account is a pass through but needs to be created. API, it's a pass through. And then have a kubectl-like way of handling calls to the device managers that is perfect for me. I'll send out the document again. Would that make sense to everybody?
Okay, but sorry, just one question. So this means the device manager doesn't have to have account information about accounts on the device. This will all pass through.
Yeah,
it comes from the Northbound.
I wouldn't see the need to store any information about the accounts. Why would there be such?
Okay, I'm just asking. Just suppose you have a device and you need username password. You would pass username password somehow to the device manager.
but why does device manager need that one? Because you're not trying to authenticate with the device manager.
No, but the device manager has to authenticate to the device in order to.
No.
It does have. So.
No, it doesn't. I mean, the only person who needs to authenticate with the device itself is the person or the entity who's trying to say, I'm going to do some operations on you. Know the fact that I am the person who's authorized to do that. So the dashboard operator is going to tell that to the device. Device manager doesn't really need to know about it.
But when I make a call to the device manager to change a configuration on the device, I have to pass some information through the device manager to the device that is then checked on the device as the enforcement point to validate that the user actually has that. So how does that information get passed? I think that's the question being asked.
I mean, I'm really not quite sure on this one, but the API that's being passed, there are two information I shouldn't say two information. There are three entities that's talking to each other. In reality, the dashboard, let's say, whoever is controlling the device or trying to control the device is going to say, the information that I'm going to pass you is for the specific user, authenticate the user. That authentication information or username password is going to be called into the device manager. The device manager is going to call whatever the device is using to pass that information into the device, saying that, okay, there's somebody who wants to talk to you, or is this authorized user? And that information is
the device manager is going to check that authorization?
No, the device is going to check that authorization. Device manager is just passing that data alone. There's nothing else.
What
device?
Right. So if I'm using authentication mechanisms on the device that take a username password, pardon me, right? How does that username password get down to the device when I issue a command to the device manager?
Through the device manager. Device manager is using, for example, for the Redfish managed devices, it is done through REST APIs. Is it what you're asking?
So the device manager has to have the device manager API has to have a capability to accept probably various different types of credentials when I make a call to the device manager that are then verified or checked down on the device. Username, password, cert, it's going to be various different authentication mechanisms.
If there's multiple methods of authentication mechanism, yes. Yeah. Yes.
So I have to drop, by the way. But
same.
I had to drop as well. Sorry.
Let's rediscuss. Let's continue the discussion on this one next week. I'll try to formulate and send it out. Thanks.
Yeah, I gotta drop off. Talk to you guys next week.
Cheers.
All right, bye.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.